get going. I understand our MPs beaming in have had their mics checked. Thanks very much. Welcome to meeting number 38, House of Commons Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates, as I call it, the mighty OGGO. We have witnesses today from Canada Border Services Agency, PSPC, Public Health Agency of Canada, Public Safety Canada, and Shared Services Canada. I won't name all the witnesses because there are so many. Because we have so many departments today, we will skip over the usual, with agreement of the parties, the usual 5-minute openings. Some have sent us your opening statements in writing. Thank you very much. If anyone else wishes to do so, they can do so after the fact. We'd like to give each of you just a 2-minute opening brief, please. Again, just because we have so many witnesses and only 2 hours. So
point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Just really quickly, and this may not be a point of order, but it is my understanding that when we invite witnesses to attend a committee meeting, that they are invited to send us their opening remarks 72 hours before a meeting. Right. And I would have really appreciated receiving all of the remarks that the departmental officials are bringing. I do note that Ms. Casey was the only one that provided us her comments ahead of time. And so if we are just now going to be given a summary of what they may have wanted to present, perhaps we could ask them to provide their comments in writing, all of them to provide them to us after this meeting. Thank you.
Well, that's a good point, and I did mention that perhaps in different words, but perhaps if the 5 departments would provide, I see Mr. O'Gorman has provided his, but the other departments, if you wish to provide your opening statements after the fact, it would be wonderful.
In some cases we have them, we're getting copies made.
Great. And apparently some have arrived late and will be distributed shortly, but it is a good note for our witnesses for this committee or other ones to provide the information in advance, especially for our translators, but also in respect to our members of Parliament. So we'll start with CBSA. If you would provide us with a quick 2-minute overview, please.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm Erin O'Gorman. I'm the president of the Canada Border Services Agency, and I believe you have my remarks. I would just flag briefly that the need for the ArriveCan app arose when it became impractical for the Public Health Agency to manage the manual paper-based process to pass the information necessary to provinces and territories and carry out enforcement and compliance activities, and I think we will speak more about that today. I would point out that CBSA has published a breakdown of the expenditures related to ArriveCan, and again, I think we can elaborate on that further. So I would just like to point out and address the error that was contained in CBSA's response to OPQ 597. ThinkOn was wrongly listed as a contractor when it should have been Microsoft. So the error was a human one and resulted from a one-key mistake that led to the reporting discrepancy. So I would apologize to the committee for that mistake and confirm that our CFO has double-checked and is satisfied that there are no other errors contained in the OPQ and can attest to its accuracy. So I will end there, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Ms. O'Gorman. From PSPC, please.
Members, and thank you for inviting us to speak today about how PSPC can support Canada Border Service Agency and Public Health Agency to meet their needs. I think I would draw attention to the fact that we as a common service provider are really trying to make available the most agile and effective instruments to serve the needs of our clients and help them deliver their departmental needs. In this case, we were able to leverage a number of standing offers and supply arrangements to help CBSA augment their capacity and bring on timely service to meet the pressing needs of COVID-19. As we look at our instruments and try to move and improve them, we're looking at how do we make sure that we're in a market capacity and that we're also able to provide the widest range of services. So we periodically refresh our standing offers and supply arrangements to ensure value. But in the case of emergency, we also have to balance that with risk. So in some cases, we are required to look at sole source contracts and other mechanisms to be able to move quickly, but we're always doing that within the optic of trying to balance effectiveness, cost, fairness, as well as managing risk. In this case, we think that we're able to work with our departments and agencies and provide the services that they need and to balance those factors. As we go forward, Mr. Chair, I would just like to say that we will continue to look at ways that we can be fair, open, and transparent in our procurements and try to provide the most responsive procurements possible to serve the needs of the departments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. PHAC, please. 2 minutes.
Good morning. My name is Jennifer Leathall. I'm the Vice President excuse me, of Health Security and Regional Operations at the Public Health Agency. I'll just underscore a few points that are contained in my speaking points, which I think you do have. At the onset of the pandemic, monitoring health measures at the border was a paper-based process. It was a cumbersome one, and it was very labor-intensive. It was a labor-intensive process. Further exacerbating the process was the collection of forms using biohazard protocols because, as you will remember, at that point in the pandemic, there was suspicion that the virus could live on paper. FAC was responsible for collecting, organizing, and shipping paper forms that were collected from travelers from all over the country, as well as digitizing and inputting that information into fax systems, and that could take upwards to about 14 days. We are faced with incomplete and illegible information that was contained on those forms. In terms of the number of adjustments that were made with the OICs, there were over 80 different OICs that were written by FAC as a means to respond to the evolving pandemic. And each time in most of those circumstances, a ArriveCan needed to be adjusted to respond to those new public health requirements. I just finished by stating that without a ArriveCan, Canada's ability to administer the public health measures at the border would have been significantly reduced. That's it.
Thank you. Shared services, please.
Committee for your invitation today. I'm Christina Casey, the Assistant Deputy Minister of the Citizen and Business Branch at Shared Services Canada. Shared Services provides core IT services to the Government of Canada departments and agency using an enterprise approach. Some of the services that we offer include hosting services, including the provision of cloud services across the Government of Canada. We administer brokering services, technical expertise, and tool to guide customer departments and simplify cloud adoption. So SSC has established a list of pre-qualified cloud vendors that meet security requirements who can be leveraged by departments such as CBSA to run their applications. SSC's role in regards to the Arrive Canada app has been to enable the cloud connectivity and the monitoring and the supporting infrastructure. It was about providing the foundational platform for an enterprise application to operate. Throughout the Public Health Agency of Canada and the Canadian Border Services Agency design, development, and deployment process of the app, SSC supported the implementation of a number of networking changes to enable the application to securely exchange information between the cloud solution and the Government of Canada data centers. Specifically, this was done by securely housing the app in the cloud and routing network traffic through a secure infrastructure to protect the sensitive data of Canadians and visitors. So I'll leave my opening comments at this. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much. It's my understanding that Public Safety Canada will not be providing an opening, so we'll go right to Mr. Barrett for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To CBSA, on which date will you provide the outstanding documents that were ordered by this committee on the 17th of October?
You refer to, I believe, are the invoices?
Invoices and list of subcontractors.
Right. So we did provide a list of invoices, and my apologies, we are looking at about 500 invoices. So we're in the process of having those translated, and we can work with the clerk to see whether you would like those provided at once or as we finish the translation. In terms of subcontractors, we don't have that information. We just have information relating to those who held the contract directly with either CBSA or PSPC.
So CBSA does not know who the subcontractors were that worked on the ArriveCan app?
No, we have the relationship with the primary contractor, and again, mostly through PSPC, but we had some contracts directly ourselves.
Did ministers, staff, PCO, or any political exempt staff have any input with respect to the timeline for response to the document production request that was made by this committee?
No.
And there was a lot of public interest following the incident that you mentioned with respect to Think On receiving, being said to have received $1.2 million, saying that they did not receive it. That information was not provided in the House, the correction, and so the information that the minister signed off on stands in the House. So following that, we're a reasonable group of people. We gave a reasonable timeline for those documents, invoices, to be tabled at this committee. So it does raise questions when it's been 28 days since that happened. The government should know, CBSA should know where the $54 million was spent on this app, who got paid. So there's definitely questions on if this delay is the result of simply not knowing, more accounting errors. Has there been direction given in hopes that a scandal for government goes away, or at worst, that there's a cover-up happening because there's uncomfortable information for ministers or government included in there? Which of those scenarios best describes what we're dealing with in a 28-day delay in getting invoices, which should be pretty straightforward and don't even require translation because they can just be tabled, mostly containing total amounts and the name of the subcontractor?
So in terms of the error, and again, I apologize that CBSA is accountable for that error. I understand that the revised OPQ will be tabled, if not today, certainly this week. And it did come about by somebody contacting Think On because it hadn't been caught in our system. And as I mentioned, the CFO has gone through all of the other information contained in the OPQ. So it was a transmittal error. Think On did not receive a contract and was not paid for anything. It was an error in the coding, and that's how that came up.
So I remained, I guess, a bit mystified as to why the delay on providing what should be very straightforward information. I think that most people can keep track of if money goes out, that a payment, a receipt of payment is generated. The list of people getting paid should be quite easy to produce, and the committee did not suggest that the documents should come on October 31st. There was a requirement that they be here. Other departments, when they've had issues, have said, have asked for, can we extend until this date? Can we release the documents in tranches? At this point, it appears that there's an unwillingness to provide the information. So on what day can CBSA commit to provide the information that was due 2 weeks ago?
So in terms of the question, as I said, I believe that will be tabled. That information was also contained in the same information in the response to the motion.
But that's not my question, with all due respect, ma'am.
And the list of invoices has been provided. Is my understanding the list of invoices has been provided, but the actual translation of the 500 invoices will take time.
And do you have an estimate on when you'd be able to provide that? This week, this month, next month, before the end of this year?
So I don't have an estimate. We can get back to you, and we're pleased to provide the invoices as they are translated. So we can provide them in tranches as they are done. But the list of invoices themselves, I believe it's approximately 500, has been provided.
Okay. I'm short on time that I see. I just can't stress enough that this is certainly a matter that's in the public interest. We gave a very reasonable timeline to be to allow for CBSA to provide that information. It hinders the work of this committee. It causes Canadians concern when there are tens of millions of dollars with questions that have been raised, some arising out of amounts being paid to groups that didn't receive them, and some based on the entire amount of the project. So I do look forward to receiving an update on when we can expect all of the documents. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Mr. Housefather for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the departments for being here today. The first thing I want to establish is why we're here. We're here because we want to understand whether the amount spent on ArriveCan was reasonable under the circumstances and what the amount was. And therefore, I want to start by establishing what each department was responsible for. So as I understand it, Public Services and Procurement as a common provider went to tender or negotiated umbrella agreements to satisfy demands and specifications of client departments. Basically, this is a set of terms through which client departments could issue purchase orders for services related to ArriveCan. But it is my understanding that PSBC did not issue any such purchase orders. Is that correct, Mr. Mills?
Actually, there will be a combination of, they're called task authorizations. In some cases, their task authorization will be in a dollar value where the department themselves would issue the task authorization, but above their delegated authority, we would actually issue the task authorization. Nevertheless, we do work with the department to make sure that the task authorizations are within the stream of work within the overall contract to make sure that they're tasking what was in the contract in terms of the types of services that they would be getting from the firm.
Mr. Mills, are there any purchase orders? Are there any contracts related to ArriveCan expenses that are not on the document we received from Public Safety, CBSA, that came from your department?
To my knowledge, there would be nothing that we would put in place by ourselves for ourselves. We would only put in place.
That was what I was asking. That was what I was asking from the beginning. Thank you. Shared services. My understanding is you provided cloud connectivity, security, and monitoring services for the app. But it is my understanding that, again, you created a list of companies for cloud services that if another department wanted to contract with, that you would authorize, but you did not put forward any contracts yourself, any purchase orders yourself related to ArriveCan to third parties. Is that correct?
To cloud service providers to which the departments can select, but we did not put any purchase orders directly related to the ArriveCan app.
That's what my question was. Thank you. PHAC, did you put out any purchase orders directly to ArriveCan, or again, is everything on the list that we received from CBSA?
Any purchase orders directly related to the development or maintenance of the ArriveCan app.
Thank you very much. So then I'm going to go to the department that is responsible, which is CBSA. CBSA, in the document that you provided, you had some numbers that I need to better understand. You stated that $8,070,394 is the entire contract value for a contract with Ibisca for professional services. Later in footnotes, you say the expenditure for the contract for this time period was $110,175, not $8,070,394. Please explain to me exactly what that means. What was the amount, the exact amount that was paid to Ibisca related to the ArriveCan app only?
Amount that was paid to Ibisca was what was noted in the footnote, the $110,175. The amount of the $8 million was the full contract amount for Ibisca, and it was.
But that was not what was that. But I understand. I understand that you had a contract with Ibisca, and that a certain part of the contract related to a purchase order for ArriveCan. But you create confusion when you provide an $8,070,394 number, leading people to believe that that entire amount related to ArriveCan, when in fact the amount in a footnote appears to be $110,175. So can you confirm to me, yes or no, was $110,175 the amount paid to Ibisca for ArriveCan and nothing else beyond that paid to Ibisca for ArriveCan?
Amount paid to OBISCA up until March 31st, 2022
for ArriveCan
for ArriveCan.
was 110,175, not 8,070,394.
Correct.
Okay. What was the total cost paid to third parties for the development of the ArriveCan app as of the date that you were mentioning, March of 2022? And when I say development, I mean the initial development costs and the cost of updating the app over 70 times. I do not want to have you include costs under a contract that were not relevant to ArriveCan or costs unrelated to development such as telephone support to users. What was the amount paid simply for the development and updating of ArriveCan to third parties?
So your question, I can confirm that we spent $80,000 to develop the initial app, version 1.0, and then we spent a further $8.8 million to develop the 3 different versions of the app, one on iPhone, one on Androids, and one on the website users, with over 70 different adjustments to the application.
Thank you. So basically the correct number that we should be using when we're talking about the development of ArriveCan was approximately 8.8 million plus 80,000, correct?
Development of the application.
Yes,
the operation
that's what
of the
I said.
application and the CVSA.
I said the development. I said the development. Okay. What was the total cost paid to third parties for ArriveCan that was not related to development? Meaning, what was the amount? Let's take outside the 8.8 million. What was the actual amount paid? Not the. No, I'm not asking for the contractual
I'm
amount
afraid
that you
that's
could
your time,
spend
Mr.
up to.
Housefather. We'll have to get that to your next round. Ms.
Thank you so
Spinola,
much,
please.
Mr. Chair.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Chair. My first question is for Ms. Erin O'Gorman. I'd like to come back to one of your answers to my colleague who said you did not have any information about the subcontractors who have worked on ArriveCan. The government has actually refused to give the identity of the subcontractors to the media because of the national security exemption. So if these subcontractors are unknown to you, how is it possible to make sure that they meet all of the necessary security criteria for developing an app with so much personal information such as the ArriveCan app?
May I invite my colleague from PSPC who would have the details of those contracts in terms of the work that they performed?
Merci.
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to start by making a distinguishment between subcontracts and a professional services firm. In most cases, these were professional IT services firms. So the subcontracts in this case are actually...
Un instant.
Just a moment, please.
La traduction.
The translation is very weak. The translation volume is very, very weak.
Je vais le mettre au bout, puis...
I'll put it up to max and then I'll remove it afterwards. It's excessively weak. Very sorry. Please start again.
I would like to make the distinguish between a case with a subcontractor and a professional services firm. These were professional services firms that were talking about subcontractor resources, which are essentially employees. And therefore, the information we have is personal information around the employees, the JC strategies, and other companies engaged to provide the IT resources for the project. So the relationship contractually, is with the company. We maintain that relation, but the relation on the resources is maintained with the company.
Okay.
Okay. My question remains the same. How do you proceed to ensure that subcontractors that you don't know, in spite of the fact that you know that the company's recruited them because it's basically a recruitment company. So the company that's recruited them, you know this company, but how come you don't know the subcontractors even though they're developing an app and updating it? And this is an app that includes excessively personal data related to not just Canadians, but also people living abroad. So how do you ensure that these people have the necessary security clearance to do this, even if you do not know them?
My colleague Ron Cormier to talk about the security checks that we do on employees that work for these firms.
Mr. Chair, PSPC is familiar with all of the contractors that we have arrangements with. For confidentiality reasons, the Government of Canada doesn't disclose the names of companies who have worked as subcontractors for one of its suppliers, as it's considered third-party information. Within the IT industry, it's customary for firms to subcontract work. However, Canada doesn't have a direct contract relationship with those subcontractors. In IT professional services contracts with personnel security requirements, Canada does verify the security clearance of all individual resources proposed by the contractor. Each of them gets an individual security clearance check, no different than any other employee or contractor working on a government priority.
Merci.
Thank you. So what I've understood then is that the departments involved in ArriveCAN didn't really talk to each other about the subcontractors. Okay, fine. And now I have a question to put to Shared Services. Christina Casey, there were problems. There had to be constant updates, for example, obliging people to place themselves in quarantine even though they had met all the conditions, which would mean that they should not have had to quarantine. So how do you think these errors, how much did they cost in terms of the productivity of Quebec and Canada, in terms of tourism, tourists who weren't able to spend where they would have wanted to spend, and all the people who were not able to go to work because there was an error within the app? How much did that cost? And have you calculated these costs in the true costs related to this app? Thank you for that question. Unfortunately, I cannot comment on the impact on the economy, nor comment on questions related to the app, because that's the responsibility of the department. So I will give the floor to my colleagues within CBSA. So this was an error that took place within the agency. That was because we hadn't tested the product and an error slept in. There are 10,000 Canadians that were impacted, and that's completely unacceptable. We spotted this mistake within a few days, and we contacted the people concerned and corrected these files. Of course, that doesn't take away the damages caused to these 10,000 people. But when we're talking about 30 million users, 30 million travellers, this was an exception. But it was completely unacceptable that the agency wasn't able to find the error before it was placed before the public. An exception that cost us how much in terms of productivity? We're talking about 10,000 people out of 30 million, and there's 10,000 people who were asked to quarantine mistakenly. Well, I'd like to come back to Ms. Casey. I don't know if you've received this, but we received a brief from Ms. Amanda Klein from the University of Carleton, a guide on the reform of IT procurement within the government. Have you received that brief? No, unfortunately not. Okay. Well, just to give you some context quickly, in the brief there's very interesting recommendations based on experiences abroad when it comes to IT procurement. And one of her recommendations are that we should lift the bilingual obligation for IT employees in order to expand the talent pool available. So I'd like to hear from you on that recommendation. Would you be open to this? And what did that imply for French speakers if that type of requirement was actually applied? I'll change to English.
Interrupt because we're out of time. I gave you a bit of extra time for the translation, Ms. Vignola, but we're out. Perhaps you could provide that to the committee in writing. Mr. Johns, for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you. First, I want to start by thanking you for attending and for your important work as Canada navigated the pandemic. It's greatly appreciated. The point here is to get to transparency here so processes can be improved. Start with maybe Ms. O'Gorman, you can help me. We heard at an earlier meeting with the National President of the Customs and Immigration Union that frontline service officers were never consulted on the development of the app or any of its more than 70 updates. We also heard that because of the app, officers had to act as, quote, de facto IT consultants. So this added, to the strain of officers who are already experiencing understaffing due to previous cuts from previous governments. Can you explain why officers working on the front line weren't consulted at any stage?
Thank you. So when the ArriveCan was created, it was done within a month. And so regrettably, there was no consultation, and that is not how we would typically roll out something new technology in the agency. That's not how we would typically operate. I will say that BSOs, as they used ArriveCan, did provide feedback on how it was working. That feedback was taken into account as updates were done and to our operational guidance. So absolutely the feedback that we received from individual BSOs was much appreciated and highly valued.
Okay, well, we're just not hearing that from the union, that their workers weren't consulted. They're on the front line dealing with that every day, you know. And so maybe just because of time, unless it's short.
I was just going to note that BSOs did help individual travelers fill out ArriveCan, and that was greatly appreciated. Many people of the 30 million users didn't need assistance with BSOs, but certainly I want to acknowledge that they did help travelers coming through both the land and the air.
Can you provide details of any estimates for developing, updating, maintaining, and promoting the ArriveCan that were prepared using the Treasury Board's Guide to Cost Estimating?
I missed the first part of that question.
Can you provide any details of any estimates for developing, updating, maintaining, and promoting the ArriveCan app that were prepared using the Treasury Board's Guide to Cost Estimating? And you know, if you don't have any precise information readily available, would you say the cumulative cost of the app has exceeded what were estimated?
So the ArriveCan wasn't undertaken as a project. It was developed quite quickly, and changes were made over the course of the pandemic as the health measures changed. So there is a budget of $54 million until the end of this fiscal year, of which $41 million has been spent. With regard to Treasury Board guidance on costing, it does relate to projects, but I will invite our CFO to talk about his costing approach for the ArriveCan app.
So thanks very much. And initially, the ArriveCan app was managed by Public Health Agency, and they provided us $12.37 million in 21-22 as part of a supplementary B budget transfer. So that was based on our forecasts for expenditure in 21-22. We received an additional $12.4 million via an IRCC Treasury Board submission, which was given in Sub C, and that was particularly around the advanced, the PVC, the Proof of Vaccination Certificate.
Okay, maybe Mr. Allison, do you want to as well respond to that?
Certainly. Mr. Chair, overall, the Government of Canada spent $2.2 million in paid advertising to promote COVID-19 travel-related requirements.
Yeah.
Sorry, one moment, Mr. Allison. Madame?
You have to get closer to your mic because the interpreter cannot hear you.
I guess, you know, just if you can directly relate this question to the Treasury Board's guide to cost estimating.
Yeah. I don't have awareness of exactly what was gone through with that. I don't know, Jennifer, if you would have.
I don't have any details on that.
No.
I would say that the costing of ArriveCan was consistent with Treasury Board policies and guidance.
What's the long-term plan with the ArriveCan app? Can you talk about how much is the app expected to cost on an annual basis? And you talked about it wrapping up at the end of the year. What analysis has been done to assess whether Canadians will be getting adequate value for money now that the app is voluntary?
So we have moved from a mandatory app to a voluntary app. We call for advanced declaration, which was the former E311 paper that people can now fill out voluntarily in advance of landing at some, I think we're up to 5 airports. We're rolling it out across the country, one airport at a time, with a view to eventually expanding it to the land border. So early reports are that it saves, it's a difference between about 120 seconds at a kiosk and 80 seconds. So we're tracking that time and usage. We are currently spending $1.5 million in non-salary to maintain the advanced declaration portion, but I don't have the long-term budget for that. We're looking as we roll it out and as we as we take the lessons learned and work with our contractors to do a knowledge transfer into our employees to be able to maintain the app.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Barrett, or Mr. Johns. I'll now go back to Mr. Barrett, please, for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. What is the security clearance required for subcontractors to work on ArriveCAN? What, just the level that they're required to have?
Mr. Chair, that would depend on the nature of the work specified in the task authorization and the contract. It would vary from contract to contract, but it could be anywhere between enhanced reliability up to secret.
Were any of those requirements waived before subcontractors would have been allowed to work on the app?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. So it would surprise you to know that an amendment was made to one of the RFPs, 47419-198-132, that's provided by the department, that subcontractors could work without security clearance in place.
Sorry, could you repeat that number, please?
Yep, 47419-198-132. And it was a response to a question with respect to security clearance and indicated that work could commence and the subcontractor could start to work without security clearance in place. Is that unusual for a subcontractor who's dealing with Canadians' personal information, private health information, biometric information?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question, Mr. Chair. In effect, the individual security clearances and the waiving of those would be highly situationally dependent. Without the details of that particular task authorization, I can't speak to the specifics of why that might have been the case. I think that, generally speaking, how these professional services contracts are used and how the resources in them are employed is a business requirement that's established by the client departments that we work with. So I'm assuming this was a CBSA contract, but the specifics of why waiving that might be appropriate in a unique case is something that would be operationally dependent that they would have to speak to.
Okay. Well, it would be helpful for this committee to know why someone wanting to be a network analyst with what would normally require secret security clearance would then be able to work on information systems specifically with access to Canadians' personal information, private health information, biometric data, especially at a time when we're becoming increasingly aware of cyber threats to our country. So I guess I would look to I'd look to the witness panel to perhaps, if they can't provide us a fulsome answer today, provide in writing or return to the committee with information on the frequency with which this is permitted and the potential risk that Canadians were exposed to as a result of this, and ultimately, who is the signing authority that can waive security clearance requirements?
To this case. However, the contractors and consultants that we used did not access the personal information. It was only employees who had access to the databases with any personal information, and those employees would have had the proper security clearance to do so.
I guess, Mr. Chair, my concern is that people who are developing it and who have access to our systems can develop ways to access them after the time that their work is completed, particularly someone who doesn't have reliability status, secret clearance, top secret clearance, any enhanced top secret clearances, dealing with the most sensitive information. We don't know. We're hearing a lot about state actors from other countries who are interfering in our democracy here, and we have people who are potentially working on our information systems, our information management systems, developing an app that's specifically collecting Canadians' personal information, and we don't know who they are, and we don't know that they would ever receive security clearance, even if their application was in progress. I can make an application, and it could never be approved. But if that's the only requirement to get work is that you just file the paperwork, I think that the exposures to Canadians is quite serious. So, Mr. Chair, how much time do I have left?
You have a minute left.
Okay, well, I guess I would just ask, who on appearing before us today can, if they could identify themselves as being able to get the information on who can sign off on the waiving of security clearance and the potential implications of that, and if a threat assessment is done before, during, or after that contractor has done work, and if they could provide that information to the committee in writing, because I imagine it'll take a little bit of research. So I'm not sure, Mr. Chair, if we could just get someone from the witness panel to identify themselves, that they'd be able to do that.
We'll get back to that information.
Okay, so
CBSA will.
CBSA will provide that information. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. Mr. Baines, over to you, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our guests for joining us today. I'm just going to pick up from where one of my colleagues left off earlier to the CBSA. What was the total cost paid to third parties for ArriveCAN as of today that was not related to development of the app? And please explain what these amounts were for in general buckets.
So the CBSA has now published on its website a full analysis of the ArriveCAN costs which have been incurred by the agency. For example, $7.5 million was spent with Service Canada on the call centre. Those individuals answered more than 650,000 calls from users of the ArriveCAN application. Another example would be data management. We spent $5.2 million providing data management facilities both to ourselves and also the Public Health Agency. We spent $4.6 million on data storage and cloud services. This is around for sort of the storing of that data on secure cloud. We spent $4.5 million on integrating the ArriveCAN application with the other basic systems within the organization. That would allow the Border Services officers to see the information on ArriveCAN at the primary inspection kiosks. We spent $2.3 million on security around the application, and we spent $1.7 million on accessibility. All of those details are reported on our website and open to scrutiny. Thank you.
So to be clear, those are all outside of the development of the app.
The development of the app, my previous answer around the $80,000 for the first version and the $8.8 million relates to the application. The rest of the expenditure relates to how the process, the public health process, operated over the last 2.5 years.
Okay, and then based on your answers to question 2, the previous one and this one, where you said that total amount was, I believe, $8 million and then 80,000, where you said the total amount paid to third parties was all of the above these buckets now. Can I correctly assume that like the total cost paid out to third parties related to the ArriveCAN app as of today, what's the exact total?
We have $34.8 million paid to third parties. But as I explained before, that's not necessarily to companies. That includes $7.5 million to Service Canada. So it covers contracts, but also memorandum of understanding.
Okay, and just moving on to, 18 million people downloaded the ArriveCAN app. So it's fair to say that its usage was ubiquitous amongst Canadians. And can you tell the committee what kind of support does an application need, whether from an HR perspective or a data storage and cloud service management perspective, to maintain the app that was being used as frequently as it was?
Maybe I can start and then invite my colleague to add some detail. So it was also the monthly changes that were made to the application, both in terms of improvements and responding to the changing health measures. So sometimes those were significant, plugging into provincial proof of vaccination systems, provincial and territorial proof of vaccination systems, providing COVID test results, and also facilitation techniques, having people be able to save their profile for travelers who are truckers who are going back and forth across the border. Very helpful, or nurses in Windsor to not have to put their profile in every time they crossed. So there were two aspects to changes that took place on virtually a monthly basis. So just when we talk about the app, it's the cost of making those changes, as well as you mentioned, the security and the accessibility, plugging into CBSA's systems, the cloud maintenance. So I can invite my colleague Kelly to give some details on that, but just wanted to paint the picture of what the app looked like over the 2.5 years in which it was being used.
I'll just interrupt you. You have about 15 seconds.
So above and beyond what Ms. O'Gorman has noted, there was additional work required around cloud expertise, back-end systems, and as noted, the cybersecurity and the accessibility pieces that were the core pieces to keeping the application running.
Great. And that's 5 minutes. It goes by fast. Ms. Vinola for 2.5, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to come back to Ms. Casey and the question of bilingualism when it comes to IT employees. As I've said, there was this recommendation from Carleton University. I'd like to get your opinion on that and see what the impact could be on employees.
Mr. Chair, I haven't not seen the report, so it's very hard for me to provide an answer. So I will have to provide an answer in writing. But I will say that we do ensure bilingualism of our IT resources. We do have, and we ensure that when we hire IT resources, that they meet bilingual requirements, and that we have a program to ensure that we maintain bilingualism through training. So we will be happy to provide a more detailed answer in writing.
Merci.
Thank you. My next question is for Mr. Cormier. According to different databases, GC Strategies owners seem to not have lobbied nor have contributed to a political fund, which is very good. They are basically just a talent recruitment IT firm, amongst others, and for years now, SMEs have been mentioning that it's very difficult to be recognised and get contracts with the government. So how could a micro firm actually win over the confidence of the government and be able to get contracts from different departments and to receive over 9 million's worth of contract to recruit people to create ArriveCAN? That's my first question. And secondly, how do you explain the fact that the government decided to grant a contract to a sole source GC Strategies, which is basically a talent recruitment firm, instead of turning to IT companies who are already specialised in developing apps related to health? Mic, please, for the speaker. Thank you. Thank you for that question. Mr. Chair.
Has been registered in a supply arrangement with PSPC for a number of years. The task-based information procurement, TBIPs, supply arrangement is where they're presently registered. They are a Tier 2 supplier, which requires them to have done business for a minimum of 3 years and to have proven invoices for over $12.5 million in historic contracting in the domain in which they're being assessed to be able to provide services. GC Strategies in particular was already in the TBIPS instrument before the pandemic began. And they were also working already in the CBSA environment on other mobile applications.
Afraid I have to cut you off there. We're out of time. Perhaps you can submit the rest of the answer in writing to the committee. Mr. Johns for 2.5, please.
I'll stay on that theme. The mandate of Shared Services Canada is to, quote, implement enterprise-wide approaches for managing IT infrastructure and employ effective and efficient business management processes, end quote. What portion of services provided to other departments are done with in-house resources compared to outsourced contracts? Maybe Ms. Casey, you can help me with that.
We don't have that exact answer in front of me, but we'll get back to you in writing about the percentage.
Now, would shared services have had the capacity to develop the ArriveCan app using in-house resources?
Yeah, I'll pass that question to my colleague.
Just seizing on the enterprise-wide comment, this was an enterprise-wide, and in fact, it was extremely specific, stemming from public health agencies' efforts to try and manage a paper process. And so it was in that context that they came to CBSA to ask us to develop the app extremely quickly. And so quickly that we didn't have enough expertise on our workforce to do it. And also at the same time as the department was itself trying to manage the border and its employees in the context of the pandemic. So just looking back with the information we had at the time and the request we had, the posture of the agency was to be as helpful as possible. And so it used, as my colleague referenced, whatever tools that it could to enhance its workforce
I appreciate
to be able
that,
to deliver on the
I
app.
really appreciate that, Ms. O'Gorman. I just think that, and you can understand from the public's perspective, I mean, GC Strategies took a cut of 1.3 million or 2.7 million, upwards of 2.7 million. We don't know which number. Hopefully you can share that today with this committee, because I think the public deserves to know. But that's a lot of money, and I do believe that that money could be better spent in the public service, hiring people that can actually do that work. They're not even experts in tech. So this is concerning, you know, for everybody. Do you not believe that the Government of Canada should have the in-house capacity in 2022 to develop a mobile app?
So I'll first agree completely. It is a lot of money, and it's important to understand how that money was spent. So I agree. At the time when CBSA was asked to develop the app, it went out to 3 service providers to receive offers, and we simply didn't have the people on staff that would allow us to develop the app as well as maintain our 180 other IT systems.
You went to the expensive consultants who hired expensive consultants. And this is kind of becoming a pattern. This is the problem, right? How do we stop that? How do we create that in-house and save taxpayers money? This is why we're here.
So absolutely.
Sorry, Ms. O'Gorman, I'm going to interrupt you. That time's up already. But again, perhaps Mr. Johns can get back to that in this next round, or you can provide it in writing. Ms. Kusi for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much to our witnesses for being here today. Mr. Mills, were any ArriveCan contractors eligible for bonuses or pay incentives?
Mr. Chair, not that I'm aware of, but as we mentioned, we have contracts with the firms, GC Strategies. What they would have in terms of compensation and those mechanisms would be within their own agreements.
Okay, so if bonuses or pay incentives were created, if it would have been created within GC Strategies. Thank you for that. I'm now going to turn to some discrepancies within the sessional paper, which my colleague started to discuss. It was recently reported in a Globe and Mail article, that federal outsourcing last year increased by 24% to $14.6 billion. So according to the sessional paper, PHAC sole sourced a contract to KPMG for $1.08 million for operations and maintenance, yet this apparently at the same time was under the purview of Canada Border Services Agency. So what's the difference between the work that KPMG did and then CBSA, please? Mr. Allison.
Mr. Chair, I can't speak to the work that KPMG did for CBSA. For PHAC, we spent approximately $3.9 million through KPMG on services provided since fall 2020 for program management support to address gaps or needs, such as accessibility, providing operational policy support, and managing public health requirements at the border.
Then perhaps Ms. O'Gorman could address that, please, with the difference between the work done by KPMG for the $1.08 million and compared to the work done by CBSA, please.
So KPMG performed work for the Public Health Agency and not for CBSA.
Okay. Well, that's interesting that PHAC sole sourced the contract, yet the work was performed for CBSA. Okay, then I'll go on to, in the documentation submitted by CBSA, were any contracts listed not publicly posted due to a national security exception, Ms. O'Gorman?
There were.
Okay, if so, what contracts were covered under this national security exception?
So I'll invite my colleagues from PSPC as they were responsible for those contracts on CBSA's behalf.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I'm just consulting my notes to see if I have that information.
Okay, perhaps while you're consulting those notes, we can now go back to Mr. Allison. I'm going to focus now on advertising contracts for ArriveCan awarded to both Cassette Communications and Banfield Seguin Media for $19.7 million and $1.2 million, respectively. Yet this information was not disclosed in the initial sessional paper. Mr. Allison, why would that be, please?
I'll be responding. As I understand, the request that had been made by the committee did not include promotion, and therefore it was excluded.
Okay, very interesting. I think we'll look more into that. Mr. Allison, do you have the list of the contracts under the national security exception? Not as of yet. Perhaps if not, you could provide them to this committee, table them at this committee for us to review at a later time. Then I'm going to go to the fall economic statement. And again, my colleague touched on this. That includes $137 million for CBSA to enhance its frontline capacity and hire additional officers to help alleviate border pressures. Will any of this new funding go to ArriveCan? And if so, what would that be for specifically, please, Ms. O'Gorman?
That funding is for border service officers.
Okay. And October 6, 2022 Globe and Mail article citing a CBSA official stated that the department budgeted a further $25 million for work on ArriveCan and other matters this fiscal year, about half of which has been spent so far. Is this funding for maintenance as Budget 2022 suggests?
It's funding for maintaining ArriveCan.
Maintaining ArriveCan, okay. Well, given that the app is no longer mandatory, what are your projections for its use as an advanced customs for the remainder of the fiscal year? And I know Mr. Downs touched upon this, but
so
brief answer.
We're rolling out advanced declaration first in the air environment with a view to next summer rolling it out into the land environment, and with a view to people having a faster border experience when they do voluntarily submit their declaration information ahead of coming into contact with at the port
airlines
of entry.
do want it. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Kusi. Mr. Kuzmirchuk, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Moore, it's worth reiterating once again, what is the cost actually to Canadians of building the actual ArriveCan app? Not the back-end stuff, not the marketing, none of that, just the actual building of the app itself.
So version 1 of the ArriveCan app cost $80,000, but then it was subject to 70 different amendments. I think, as our colleague from Public Health Agency referred to, 80 different OICs. Each of those OICs required some additional work to be done on the app. That accounted for $8.8 million to update the apps.
8.8 million, okay. Ms. Gorman, how many times has the ArriveCan app been downloaded?
20 million.
20 million times. How many submissions have been made?
30 million.
30 million. So that's a lot of data, a lot of submissions. Question to Mr. Allison is, how important was ArriveCan from PHAC's perspective to protecting the safety of Canadians?
So I'll be responding. The app, we have to remember that the ArriveCan app was just merely a tool to operationalize the OICs. The OICs were the meat of the Canadian response, and it was a multi-layered approach to protecting Canadians' health and as well our healthcare system. From our perspective, the OICs that were operationalized by ArriveCan, based on a number of assessments, has contributed to obviously protecting the health and safety of our population.
So ArriveCan helped protect Canadian safety. Fair to say?
It's fair to say it operationalized the multi-layered approach, yes.
Perfect. Being from a border community here in Windsor, I can tell you that about $400 million worth of goods cross the border each and every day. You're talking about auto parts that keep our factories going during COVID, PPE, vaccines cross the border. Ms. Gorman, you talked about 1,600 nurses in Windsor that cross the border every single day to work at hospitals. How important, what role did the ArriveCan app play making sure that you had the free flow of people and goods vital during COVID across that border? How important was the ArriveCan app to making sure that that border flows freely?
It was critical. So we had the experience at the beginning of the pandemic with paper and individuals having to communicate to border service officers the information that was being sought by public health agency, and that was being inputted manually by at the land border I'm referring to, inputted manually by border service officers. So what were approximately 1-minute interactions before the pandemic became about 7-minute interactions before ArriveCan became mandatory, and people were able to send their information ahead. And so what happened is they would send their information ahead, and it would be validated by the ArriveCan with its interaction with other systems, and the BSO, the Border Service Officer, would see a green check mark. And so it didn't go back down to 1 minute, but it became approximately a 2-minute interaction. So when we're comparing, it's not really pre-pandemic versus pandemic, it's the paper time during the pandemic versus the ArriveCan time during the pandemic. And because those lanes are shared between commercial and travelers, holding them up had a significant implication beyond just travelers having to wait, but to back up the trucks that were crossing as well.
So ArriveCan kept Canadians safe, kept the economy going, kept the flow of essential vital goods across the border in a just-in-time manner. Privacy was also a key consideration. Can you talk to me a little bit about how much funding, how much investment went into making sure that the privacy of Canadian data information is protected? And we know that the Privacy Commissioner of Canada has said that privacy is a fundamental right for Canadians. So can you tell us a little bit about the efforts and how we prioritized protecting the privacy of Canadians through this development?
So the Treasury Board Secretariat issues requirements with regards to security and accessibility for public-facing applications such as ArriveCan. And so we did spend money, approximately 4% of the overall funding was on security requirements.
Was on security, great. So the Leader of the Opposition has stated that the ArriveCan, or described the ArriveCan as an app that could have been designed over a weekend. Had we taken the conservative leader of the opposition, his advice to build an app over the weekend, could it have protected the safety of Canadians? Would it have protected the free flow of, guaranteed the free flow of essential goods across the border? And would it have protected the privacy of Canadians?
It wouldn't, and I
you
would
have about 4 seconds, so
and
perhaps you can provide that in writing.
That it was the 2.5 years of changes that also went into adjusting the ArriveCan.
Great, thank you.
With Ms. Block, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank our witnesses for joining us today for this really important conversation. On July 28, 2022, the Minister of Public Safety stated that ArriveCan was created for COVID. But the RFPs long precede COVID, and according to the documentation that the CBSA submitted to our committee, it stated that contracts used for the development of the ArriveCan app were issued prior to the pandemic, some as early as 2017. And so I am wondering if you could describe for us what was the purpose of the contracts to MGIS and 8 other vendors that began long before 2020.
So I'll invite my colleague, but just to clarify that ArriveCan was to help manage COVID and the public health requirements, but to your specific question, Kelly can discuss the specific contracts.
So with respect to the MGIS contract, that was used for numerous items such as project management across the CBSA prior to COVID. We did have other contracts as well that we did leverage throughout COVID for things like cybersecurity and some mobile app development, as well as our backend and cloud. So the actual contracts that are listed, the ones that predated COVID, had been used for other IT systems within the CBSA prior to COVID, and we continue to use those today for those items.
So perhaps you could also explain the original concept of the app and how closely it was related to the product that was launched in 2022.
So the original concept of the app itself was digitizing the intake of the contact trace form that PHAC did have prior to the pandemic. It's my understanding, and I'll turn it to Jennifer as well, is that that was the standard form that was used. So we were asked to digitize that form. We did anticipate, though, that there would be additional needs, such as integrating with our systems, integrating with the PHAC systems, and the contracts that were created did include room for that additional work as well.
Thank you very much. I want to go back to some questions around GC Strategies. On their website, it states that GC Strategies was asked to help with ongoing development and the maintenance needs of the COVID Alert app. And I'm just wondering who would have contacted GC Strategies when they appeared before the committee. They weren't able to tell us who asked, but perhaps someone in this room knows who approached GC Strategies to help with the ongoing development.
So initially, when the request came in from the Public Health Agency, CBSA approached 3 companies, GC Strategies, Apple, and Deloitte, seeking feedback from them on our requirements. And we assessed the 2 responses that we did receive and felt that GC Strategies aligned with what we knew we would have to do in terms of security and anticipated in terms of some, but not all of the changes that we thought might come. Again, the decisions we took in 2020 didn't have the benefit of hindsight, so it wasn't clear how long we would have to maintain the app, but we felt that the staff augmentation proposal from GC Strategies and the ability to use CBSA Cloud was the most appropriate for what we knew we needed.
Thank you. I'm wondering, we know there are rules around non-competitive procurement or sole sourcing. So I'm wondering if you could explain why these contracts were sole sourced.
So I'll hand it over to my colleague, but I will just go back in time to March 2020, the request we had, and the fact that there was no time to issue a competitive contract to be able to have an app within the month. But in terms of the broader rules, I'll invite PSPC to add anything.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So with respect to sole source contracts, with respect to sole source contracts, there is a requirement for the department that is wanting to contract to provide a justification. There are a number of reasons that you could justify in terms of national security, an urgent emergency issue. In this case, as we're dealing with COVID in a pandemic situation, we were trying to move and act at the most urgent basis possible. So we would have had a justification for moving quickly in terms of meeting the needs of the government to respond to COVID.
So out of 31...
Sorry, I'm afraid that's time. Ms. Thompson, over to you, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. Canada has 2 privacy acts. The first, obviously, the Privacy Act, which covers how the federal government handles personal information. The second is the Personal Information Protection and Electronics Document Act, which covers how businesses handle personal information. And understanding that we have the added layer of health information in the ArriveCan app. Ms. Gorman, would you speak to the challenges that you faced, your department faced in developing support for the ArriveCan app, and really based on the sensitivity of health information?
Very conscious from the outset, knowing that we would have personal information contained in the app with regard to the handling and the security requirements. Our colleagues at PHAC did engage with the Privacy Commissioner directly, we through them, and ensured that we met the requirements. And also, so I would invite our colleagues to discuss their interactions with the Privacy Commissioner.
So unfortunately, I was not with the Public Health Agency when those conversations began, but I'm sure we can return in writing the details of the conversations that did happen.
Excuse me, I'm having some challenges hearing.
My apologies. I wasn't part of the Public Health Agency when those conversations happened, but we will return the answer to you in writing. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm getting an echo. Ms. O'Gorman, to you again, 18 million people downloaded the ArriveCAN app. Can you tell the committee what kind of support the application needed? And this is whether it's HR perspective, data storage, cloud service management perspectives to maintain an app that's used and adapted as much and as frequently as the ArriveCAN.
Chair, there are a number of features, a number of things that we do need to do to ensure that an app like this is supported. We need to make sure that we meet the Government of Canada's standards on cybersecurity, integration of the app with the rest of the CBSA ecosystem, the PHAC, the Public Health Agency ecosystem as well, ensuring that those apps are accessible to users, introduction of new functionality throughout the 2.5 years, and then monitoring the integrity of the data and operations. So that's just an overview of what's required as part of that support moving forward.
Thank you. And considering, 30 million submissions and obviously the monumental amount of data, could you talk about a little more specific around the safeguards that were built in to ensure all privacy regulations were maintained? And this is back to CBSA.
Yes, thank you. I will take that. We did dedicate IT security expertise, and what we did was we looked at it as a security by design approach. So when we developed and implemented ArriveCAN, we needed security assessment and authorizations as per the government processes that Ms. O'Gorman mentioned earlier. So what we did for each release is that we did a review at the beginning of the release to determine the amount of functionality changes that we would have. And if the functionality changes were significant and we felt that it needed a full or that it warranted a full review, we did do full security assessment and authorization processes for those. We did 11 of those in total across the 70 functionality releases. So those were for our major releases when we were introducing things such as pre-arrival testing and the validation and verification of the proof of vaccination credentials.
Thank you. Has there ever been a government app created on the scale of ArriveCAN?
Just briefly, please.
And CBSA.
Not that I'm aware of, and I include in the scale the changes that were made over the course of the 2.5 years that the app was in use as a public health tool.
Thanks very much, Ms. Thompson. We're now going to change the order a tiny bit. We're going to go to Ms. Vanola, then the NDP with 5 minutes each. They will then, in 2 rounds from now, give up their 2.5-minute time. So we'll just combine the two. Ms. Vanola for 5, please.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Chair. My question is for Mr. Cormier. I'll go back to Mr. Cormier about the fact that we've got a sole source contract being given to GC Strategies, even although there are other companies that are specialized in app development related to health. So why did you specifically choose GC Strategies instead of turning towards companies specialized in this area?
Mr. Chair, I had started answering the question a bit earlier. In effect, GC Strategy...
Sorry, I don't have any interpretation.
Suspend for a moment.
Is it working now?
I can't hear a thing. I have nothing. And I have to put it on max again. I have to put it to max, and I already had an injury when the interpreter changed this morning. I don't want to go through that again.
I've suspended your time. Vinola, you've got 4 minutes and 8 seconds.
Donc, nous étions rendus à la...
So we were awaiting the answer from Mr. Cormier to my question, i.e. why we didn't use IT specialized companies that have experience in health-related apps.
Commencer.
Well, perhaps I could kick off as the client for our colleague from PSPC. It really was in the emergency context and the urgent request from the Public Health Agency of Canada that we then put the question to 3 companies to see if they could help us to develop an app within a month. And 2 of the companies gave us an answer. We didn't have the expertise nor time to organize a competitive contracting tendering procedure in March 2020. And with the help of PSBC, we could have done a competitive tendering approach, but in the context of spring 2020, it was an emergency context. And now my colleagues can explain the process and give more details on their side, but I just wanted to give you the background. Well, I'm just surprised that just 1 company or 2 answered that they were able to do it in a month, and that specialized companies would not have been able to do that, apparently, from what I've heard, and that it was quicker for a company to recruit people rather than to use a company that already has people who are already specialized. Perhaps I'm being a bit slow to understand today. We've got a company here with just 2 guys who are going to have to find specialized people themselves, recruit them accordingly, to think about all this and coordinate things for an app. And that's going to be quicker than turning to a company that's already got people and has already got the expertise in place. I really don't understand how that's possible. How does it add up? So with these 2 companies, the 2 companies did not come back with the same model, and we wanted to do the cloud work with the CBSA cloud work, and the other company was offering something different. And for us, and to ensure security, it wasn't the best way for us to proceed to go with that other company. I think that the company already had people that they could provide for us within the context of our specific needs. So I don't think that they had to take time to go out and find people. They already had that expertise within their contractual context that they could give to us quite quickly.
OK.
Okay. Now, Mr. Cormier. So there's a contract that GC Strategies was not which was not published because of national security exemptions once again. We're talking about 5.9 million. So what exactly was this contract, and what is the regulation or the policy which specifically prohibits the publication of that contract over and above the national security exemption? But what is there about this contract? What's so specific, which means no, we can't publish that one contract?
Mr. Chair.
And I'm sorry, a very short answer, please.
Yeah, I believe this is the contract that was awarded on December 18th, 2020 for ArriveCAN to meet the accessibility requirements of the Government of Canada. That contract had a value of $5.9 million. $4.8 million of it was actually committed for work. The contract was covered by a national security exemption that was in place in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and its national security implications for Canada. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Vinola. Mr. Johns for 5 minutes, please.
Ms. O'Gorman, the national president of the Customs and Immigration Union, told this committee that ArriveCAN is, quote, one example in a long line of far-reaching technological Band-Aid solutions in search of a problem solutions that ultimately fail to enhance border security and effectiveness in any real way, end quote. He also indicated that the agency is short-staffed between 2,000 and 3,000 officers, and that 500 officers could have been hired for the same cost of the ArriveCan app. Do you think that Canadians got good value for the $54 million that was spent, or would our borders be under less pressure if more investments were made in staffing?
Weber vigorously and actively defends the interests of his members, and I observed his comments in that regard. The money was not ongoing, so we couldn't have hired border officers with that money. Our college was closed.
How far back these staffing issues go? I mean, Ms. Kuzi asked a question about the fall economic statement and the $137 million. Can you speak a little bit about that connection to my question?
Sure. So the number of BSOs at any port of entry will fluctuate depending on travel patterns, and certainly as we come out of the pandemic, we're trying to figure out whether those travel patterns are being reestablished. I don't agree with the number of 2,000 to 3,000. Very happy to have the money in the fiscal update, and we will be putting those, as I indicated, toward border service officers.
What is the need, and how far back do these staffing issues go? I mean, speaking of previous governments and cuts that were made.
So I don't, like I said, I don't know where the 2,000 to 3,000 comes.
Okay.
In terms of modernizing the border, we do see a role for technology at the border in order to allow our border service officers to focus on facilitation and enforcement. We didn't see a decrease in enforcement during the pandemic. In fact, there was twice as many firearm seizures in 2021 as there were in 2020.
I understand that there's clearly staffing issues, though. We know that the illegal flow of illegal firearms and contraband is a huge issue right now. Maybe you can talk about what are the needs and what is it going to take to address the staffing issues at CBSA?
Well, certainly the funding in the recent federal fiscal update
is that
would help.
enough?
The agency also received funding specifically for firearms and for drugs.
Okay.
And as I said earlier, our modernization agenda is an effort to alleviate some of the more lower value action roles of the border officers so that they can focus on higher value, higher threat, higher targets.
Okay. Maybe a question for PHAC. How does the cost of the ArriveCan compare to the cost of other apps Health Canada has developed, such as the COVID Alert app or the Pocket Well mental health app?
Chris to provide additional information.
Could you please get closer to the mic? You're inaudible.
In terms of the apps that are developed on behalf of FACT, such as the ArriveCan app, the investment, as the president of CBSA has indicated, is $54 million. With respect to the other apps that were developed, those were predominantly led by Health Canada, and therefore we could not speak to the cost of those apps.
If the 27 contracts disclosed by CBSA were sole sourced, in addition to a sole source contract to KPMG by the Public Health Agency of Canada, given the number of sole sourced contracts involved in this app and the significant public attention on this issue, would you support a procurement practice review being conducted by the Office of the Procurement Ombudsman?
I can take that. So the last 2.5 years.
I just want to make sure it's
yes,
specific
very
to
unique.
the review. I'm
Yes.
asking about the review.
And so I think we're happy to learn lessons in whatever way we can, including the work that this committee is doing on ArriveCan. So we're quite happy to have any lessons, and it's just the context in which the sole source contracts were let was in the context of an emergency and insufficient time to have a competitive process.
Okay. Now, going back to one of my earlier questions, what was around the initial and estimated cost for the app? To be clear, I'm actually not asking about what was spent. We've heard that the preliminary development of the app was around $80,000 and that the costs grow over time. I'm trying to find out whether those cost increases those increases in costs were anticipated, and as the cost grew, was an analysis done at each stage whether any of the work could be done in-house.
Okay. I'm going to have to interrupt because you're right on 5 minutes, Mr. Johns, but if you could provide that to the committee in writing. And just remember to everyone, myself included, just to lean forward into your mics, please, for the benefit of our interpreters. Mr. Barrett, please, for 5.
Okay, thanks, Chair. And I just want to clarify, while I appreciate that CBSA has undertaken to provide information about what assurances were taken with respect to the waiving of security clearances, what I'd like to know is, would a single minister have the signing authority or be the one to authorize that type of action? And so would the minister be aware? It would be done through order in council then? Okay.
It would not be done through order in council, and it would not be a decision at the ministerial level.
So it would be done at the director, deputy director level?
We'll have to get back on the process for signing off on that.
Okay. It's concerning, and the reason I'm revisiting it, because we know that a passport in progress doesn't get you on the plane, but a security clearance in progress might get you access to the biometric, personal, and health information of more than 8 million people who downloaded the app. For example, I downloaded the app and put the passport and personal information in for my family. So, so there's more than just 8 million people. So we're talking about tens of millions of folks who whose information is jeopardized by this type of thing. And for on process, PSPC would not be the department responsible for the waiving of the security clearance. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. But previously, CBSA said that they don't know who the subcontractors are. So if PSPC is responsible for knowing who the subs are, who the subcontractors are, how could CBSA waive the security clearances for companies that they don't know are doing work or are prospectively going to do work?
I think the first point is, as Ms. Belanger said previously, these contracted resources didn't have access to the data, full stop. I appreciate the concern with clearances. The second point I'd make is it sounds like this is a scenario where somebody was allowed to begin work pending the review. And I think when we get back to you with information, that could have been a period of days, and we should know now whether or not they passed the security check or not. So I think the first thing that should set your mind at ease is that these contracted resources did not have access to the data, full stop. They built the tool. And then 2, what was the period of time for this kind of pending or waiver? And it could be days or weeks. And we would have known the answer by now, whether or not they passed the clearance. And so I think coming back to the committee with that information should address the concern.
Right. With all due respect, having the opportunity to do work on it versus intentionally being given access to the personal information of Canadians are two separate things. A bad actor who has not been cleared by our intelligence services could build in future access. And so that's why it's so important that we have assurances about what risk mitigation was done and if there have been any breaches as well, because this is really important. So my mind is very much not at ease. We don't know how many times security clearance was waived. We don't know for whom security clearance was waived, and we don't know if those folks who had it waived were ever even approved. There's a lot of ways that foreign state actors can test our systems, can test our processes, and this looks like a great opportunity for them to do that. Important to note that this information is not information that was exchanged, between government officials. It was disclosed to a public individual, so not a member of government, that you can work on our IS systems, our information management systems, without having the clearance. So. I'm not sure if you want to comment on that with my remaining time, but my mind is very much not at ease because, though not intentional, I think that we're open to a lot of risk, and the risk is it can't be understated.
No, and I think our goal is to provide factual information. Like, I think the concern that Canadians would have that you're verbalizing here today is really an important one. I think there are overlapping controls, though. I mentioned the fact that developing the tool is different from having access to CBSA systems or people's data. I think also the fact that this was tested by public servants, tested by an independent group who had been looking for those kinds of vulnerabilities. So again, I think with the fullness of time and the ability to look at the specifics of the situation, we may be able to document kind of a series of controls that would help assure Canadians their information was protected. Contractors building a tool didn't have access to the data. That tool was distinct from CBSA systems, and then all products were tested before being released and put into production.
And that's time. Thank you very much. Mr. Jawari, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses. I'm going to start with Mrs. O'Gorman. During this testimony, we heard two purposes, at least for the ArriveCAN. We heard about advanced declaration, and we also heard about a public health tool. Can you give us an idea which one of these purposes came first, and what was the driver for them?
So the public health measures at the beginning of the pandemic were the absolute driver, and the fact that the Public Health Agency was collecting the information they needed from incoming travelers in paper, and their inability to process that paper in a timely way to get provinces and territories the information that they needed, and for enforcement and compliance to be undertaken by the Public Health Agency. So it was very quickly discovered, which is why the same month that the pandemic was declared, the request came to CBSA to develop an application that could digitize those forms.
So thank you. So there was no base ever for as some sort of ArriveCAN before. It came in March, and CBSA said, let's launch ArriveCAN.
Correct.
Okay, fair enough. Quickly to Mr. Moore. Mr. Moore, just again, and I know my colleague have confirmed this about 100 times by now, the total cost of the initial application was $80,000, and the subsequent cost was $8.8 million for development of nearly 70 updates, which relates to ADOIC. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, let's quickly go to, I believe, Mr. Allison. We talked about ADOIC. For Canadians who might not be aware of what OIC stands for, can you tell us what it stands for and quickly give us an example of OIC? Because we hear ADOIC, 70 requirement. Can you quickly give us a sense of what it is?
So I'll take that question. OIC stands for Orders in Council, and it was the instrument that was used to implement or put in place the proper authorities or requirements for the public health measures.
So those are basically public health requirement that was sent as the functionality that needed to be developed in ArriveCAN.
Correct.
Okay.
And
that translated to about 70 changes.
70 packages, yes.
70 packages. So if I take $8.8 million and divide it by 70, it's about $125,000 per each one of these changes. Can you give us a sense of an example of what one of these changes would look like?
So I can speak to some of the requirements that changed over the course of the pandemic. I believe it was in April of this year, the government decided to implement a vaccine differentiated border. And what I mean by that is those individuals who were vaccinated, double dosed, were accorded certain benefits by being vaccinated once it was proven that vaccination was an effective mechanism to protect individuals. And those who were unvaccinated would be subject to a different regime. And what I mean by that is that they would have to have the pre-arrival test, which could have been a PCR or a RAT. They would have had to have been tested day 1, day 8. They would have been subject to quarantine or isolation, depending on the situation as well. So ArriveCAN needed to reflect those two different streams of travelers.
Okay.
When it came to the vaccination status, and I believe Kelly...
Thank you. I only got about 45 seconds, my apology. But so is it fair to say that these changes are quite complex and it needs to integrate a number of different, not only platforms, but also functionalities across? Madam O'Gorman? Yes. Okay. So just painting the picture, we had to develop an application in less than a month. We started working with PHAC to get roughly about 70 requirement to be able to do. And we leverage PSPC existing standing purchase order to be able to facilitate this. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Mr. Miles?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Well done. Only 2 seconds past, Mr. Shari. Ms. Block for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just want to go back and make sure that I'm fully satisfied that I understand some of the answers that have been given here today. Ms. O'Gorman, I'm going to start with you. You said that there were 3 companies that you identified that you thought could do this work. Can you just give me their names again?
Deloitte, Apple, and GC Strategies.
Apple and GC Strategies. I have to say that I echo Ms. Vignola's comments regarding the questions that she had in the choice of GC Strategies, who in their own testimony confirmed that they weren't tech experts, that they weren't developers, that they brought teams together, and so that they themselves didn't have the expertise. And where I'm going with these questions would be that you also stated that you have no information on the subcontractors. Do you have information on, do you know who they are?
No, the contract was with GC Strategies.
Okay, so you don't know who those subcontractors are. Is there a requirement for a company like GC Strategies to also follow with some vetting in regards to security clearance requirements for subcontractors?
Yes.
And what would they be very similar to the same vetting process that GC Strategies itself would have to undergo?
So the security requirements would apply to anybody that was working on the application.
So what sort of oversight would CBSA or any other department provide to GC Strategies to ensure that they were complying with that vetting process?
So it is a requirement of the contract. The issue was raised of whether there was an individual who may not have completed the security requirement process. I don't have that information, so we will come back in writing on the process and who makes those approvals. So understood the question.
So I am not asking about that specific individual. I'm wondering who provides oversight to a company like GC Strategies, who is dealing with all subcontractors that are, that we cannot know anything about. Who's providing oversight to ensure that they are vetting those subcontractors to the same level that they themselves are being vetted for security clearance?
So PSPC is responsible to ensure that contractors are compliant with the requirements in the contract that they have with the government.
Mr. Chair, yes. The contract would have the security requirements. We have a contract security program, so the GC Strategies would be required to ensure that any resources that they were using met those requirements. They'd bring forward the information on those individuals, and they would be vetted through the contract security program of the Government of Canada.
Okay, thank you.
You have 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Stephanie, I'll turn the rest of my time over to Stephanie.
Sure. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Member Block, for those excellent questions, as well as MP Barrett as well. Look, we're here today, and the government is trying to convince Canadians that this was a pandemic environment, and this app was done in an effort to keep Canadians safe. And our job here as a committee is to determine that it was done in the most cost-effective, most transparent, and most secure way possible. Well, let's take a look at what we've seen here today. The cost, as we've discussed previously, this app, which ended up costing $54 million, was reported on in the National Post on October 11th of 2022 that two companies, Laser Technologies and Tribal Scale, said they could have created this app for $250,000. So it simply doesn't meet the costing factor. The transparency factor. We look at the think-on discrepancy as raised by my colleague Michael Barrett here. We look at the national security exceptions, which we still don't know are after I asked twice here today. And finally, the release of documents, which we still don't have here today. And finally, the integrity of data, which clearly my colleague, Mr. Barrett, has brought into clarity of question as a result of the clearance questions. So was this app created in the most cost-effective, most transparent, most secure way possible? We're not convinced. We're not convinced on this side of the table. And I don't think Canadians are either, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. You have 2 extra seconds.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Cusi, Mr. Hostfather, we'll finish 5 minutes with you. Then I just need about 2 minutes from the committee's time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, in response to Mr. Cusi's most recent statement, I'm going to quote from former Conservative Prime Minister Kim Campbell. It is quick and easy to attack, to make an accusation true or false, and disparage someone. Answering and refuting always takes more time. There is an old saying that a lie is halfway around the world before the truth can get its pants on. And I think one of the things that is incredibly misleading is this claim that it could have cost $250,000 to create the ArriveCAN app. That's basically, to me, like saying I spent 2 years creating the best possible sports car. I invested tons of research in it. I made 70 upgrades to the car. I tested it at a level that it could run on every racetrack on every surface in the world to meet the highest safety standards. And then someone 2 years later comes along and builds the core of the car, never having to actually drive by anybody, never having to meet any safety standard, and saying that's the same thing. Even the people who ran these companies do not suggest it could have cost $250,000. They even admit that they built the front end of an app, they copied the front end of an app with no back office link to the CBSA system, with no security with respect to vaccinations that was required from multiple jurisdictions, et cetera. So my question to the CIO of the CBSA is, can you please tell me, is it true that you could have built this app for $250,000?
No, it is not.
Can you expand on why it is not?
There were, as you mentioned, over 70 functionality changes. We had exemptions for essential workers that we had to include the business rules for the truckers, the nurses, the cross-border workers that we had to ensure continued the free flow of goods and services into the country. We had traveler self-service reporting. We had symptoms and quarantine we had to look at. We had scanning of documents. We had pre-arrival testing we had to include. As you said, the proof of vaccination, ensuring that we could validate and authenticate those items. We had to then look at, as we were reopening the border, reopening to foreign nationals, how do we do that? How do we get those people into to increase the number of travelers crossing the border? So there's absolutely no way we could have done all of that for $250,000.
Thank you. That was very clear, and I've really appreciated your testimony today. You've always been very clear in all your answers. Thank you. My question now is to the CFO of CBSA. Another oft-repeated thing I've heard 20 times today is you spend $54 million on the app. Previously, you gave me a number of $34.8 million that you said was spent, including amounts that you've internally accounted for. So let me again go back. Does the $34.8 million number you gave me include the $8 million for Ibisca or the $110,000?
So the number I quoted you was for all the external costs, not associated directly.
I understand.
Internal costs.
I understand. But you again on a list put $8 million for Ibisca, then have acknowledged today that really $110,000 of that $8 million went to the development of ArriveCAN. In the $34 million figure you gave me, was it the $110,000 or the $8 million?
The $8 million is a wider contract for other services.
You're not answering my question, sir. I'm asking you, in the $34 million that you say you have paid to third parties for ArriveCan, is it $110,000 that you properly included, or did you overcalculate and use the whole $8 million?
$110,000.
$110,000. Thank you. That was what I was asking. Now, you also mentioned in the $34 million that there were monies paid to another government department. Which weren't really paid out, but were through an internal agreement. What was that amount?
$1 million to service Canada for the call center, and that covered 650,000 calls from members of the public.
But it wasn't paid out to a third party. It was an internal transfer within the government of Canada. So what was the actual amount paid out to third parties outside of government?
Back to you on the detail of that, because what we accounted for in the $34.8 million is all the external costs we incurred. That includes the public sector, but it also includes the private sector.
I understand, but public sector costs between government departments is not paid out outside government. If you would get back to me with that, but could I correctly say that we have not spent and paid to third parties $54 million at this stage?
Not to external third parties.
I have to interrupt you there because your time is up.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Housefather. Ms. Thompson, I laugh with joy. Your dog's back there. That was great. That's our time, folks. I just need a couple. Oh, I see Mr. Johns. I'll get to you in a moment. I just have, we've received all of the speaking notes, but I do require committee's consent on an issue. I'm just going to read it out, please, to be formal. The speaking notes presented today by CBSA, PSBC, Public Health Agency of Canada, and Shared Services be taken as read and appended to the evidence of today's meeting. I assume we all have that? Wonderful. Witnesses, thank you very much. I just want to follow up with a couple of things. There was quite a few questions left outstanding that you promised to get back to us on. I would ask that you please provide it to the committee in a swift manner, please, and not leave us trying to chase you down. CBSA, Ms. O'Gorman, I realize it's a lot of documents, but I will state as chair, I'm disappointed at the delay in even getting an estimate from CBSA on how long the documents will be for translation. I would ask you to get back to us as soon as possible and express, as chair, my disappointment as CBSAs for continuing to drag this out. Mr. Johns, we have a hard close at 1 o'clock, but please go ahead.
I think we can get this wrapped up under that. Mr. Chair, on Friday, I sent a letter to the Procurement Ombudsman on behalf of the NDP, and it's in respect to the ArriveCan matter. And as you are all aware, the House recently passed a motion recommending the Auditor General conduct and prioritize a performance review of the app, something that we also push for here at the committee. And I believe that there are some elements of a review of the ArriveCan app that would fall under the mandate of the Procurement Ombudsman, which includes assessing whether a department's acquisition of goods and services are conducted in a fair, open, and transparent manner. Now, last July, the office conducted a procurement practice review of non-competitive contracts involving the We Charity following requests by 3 members of Parliament. And in the case of ArriveCan, several sole-sourced contracts have been awarded, and I believe it's in the public interest to determine whether the exemptions from holding competitions were met in those cases. And I believe the Office of the Procurement Ombudsman has the expertise to look into this issue and could perhaps provide a more expedited answer than waiting on possible Auditor General review on all aspects of the app. So as such, I'm asking for the committee's support in recommending the Procurement Ombudsman conduct a review. Therefore, I'd like to move a motion, Mr. Speaker, that the committee recommend the Procurement Ombudsman assess whether contracts awarded by departments in relation to the ArriveCan application were issued in a fair, open, and transparent manner, and whether contracts awarded on a non-competitive basis were issued in compliance with the Financial Administration Act, its regulations, and applicable policies and procedures. And I did circulate this motion in both official languages, so everybody in the committee has it. It's a pretty straightforward motion, and I'm hoping that the committee will support this request and this motion.
I see no opposition. No debate. So moved. All agreed. Thanks very much. And we'll finish up 5 minutes early. Thank you, witnesses. Thank you, everyone.